Most Sith want to rule the galaxy. This one wanted to eat it, and he spent 1500 years working towards that under names nobody ever connected. To the Sith Empire, he was the Emperor, a voice behind a throne almost no one ever saw. On the world of Zakuul, they called him Valkorion and worshipped him as a god. Long before either, a quiet farming world knew him as a boy with black eyes who killed his own family before he was old enough to rule anything. Same being, 3 faces, and nobody put them together until it was far too late. What makes him terrifying is not the body count, though that number is hard to hold in your head. It is the method. He did not conquer worlds so much as drain them, pulling the force out of a planet until nothing was left but a husk where living beings used to be. He did it twice, 1,000 years apart, and the second time he barely had to try. He also never needed to be in the room. He ran a 1,000-year empire through borrowed bodies, and he kept agents inside the Jedi Order who did not know what they were carrying. He also fed on wars he never intended to win, because ending them would have shut off the supply. He kept one of the greatest Jedi who ever lived in a cell for 3 centuries and drank from his mind the entire time. Every empire that tried to stop him ended up feeding him instead. Everyone who got close enough to understand what he was paid for it, usually with their own mind. The few who survived that lesson spent lifetimes waiting for a chance to use it. He wore all 3 names, and he outlasted every one of them. It begins with the question everyone eventually asks about him, and the answer turns out to be worse than the question. Darth Vitiate consumed 2 entire worlds, and for more than 1,000 years, no one understood how far his power actually reached. He operated under different names through separate empires, and the galaxy never realized they belonged to the same being. In the final days after the Great Hyperspace War shattered the old Sith Empire and scattered its survivors into exile, Vitiate summoned the remaining Sith Lords to Nathema, the world Mark Aragnos had granted him. These were the survivors of the most devastating war the Sith had ever fought, and many of them were powerful enough to have carved out their own empires. Vitiate dominated every one of them at once, binding their wills to his own and channeling their combined strength into a ritual unlike anything the galaxy had seen. More than 8,000 Sith reduced to fuel for a single act of consumption. The ritual held them in place while it drained each Lord's connection to the Force and fed it into Vitiate. The world around them began to die before the ritual was finished. The ritual stripped Nathema of all life and all Force energy, leaving behind a void so complete that nothing lived on that world and nothing grew. A scorched world could recover, seeds could take root, and given enough time, life would return on its own. On Nathema, none of that was possible. The Force had been pulled out entirely. The soil itself was lifeless, not dead in the way land dies after a fire, but permanently empty, as if the planet had been hollowed from the inside and left standing only as a shell. Jedi who set foot on the surface centuries later described the sensation as total absence. They felt no dark side energy and no light. The Force had been so completely removed that walking on Nathema was compared to breathing in a room where the air had been drained and not replaced. Nathema stayed empty for more than 1,000 years. Life did not creep back. The dead soil produced nothing, and Force-sensitive visitors felt the void the moment they entered the atmosphere. Patches of vegetation and small creatures eventually began returning during the events of the Nathema conspiracy, and after the fall of Valkorion, the God King identity Vitiate had built on the distant world of Zakuul. Nathema began healing further, though even those who studied the recovery could not agree on how it was happening. Centuries later, he did it again, and this time he needed no ritual at all. Ziost, one of the oldest throne worlds of the Sith Empire, was not simply another display of strength. After a coalition of Republic and Imperial forces struck him down on the jungle moon of Yavin 4, Vitiate was weakened and needed a suitable target to replenish himself. Vitiate dominated the free will of beings across the entire planet in real time, possessing soldiers and civilians without being physically present on the surface. Republic forces deployed to Ziost found themselves fighting the very people they had been sent to protect, as entire military units and sheltering civilians turned without warning. Jedi who resisted his influence watched colleagues turn on them mid-sentence, their eyes emptied and their will replaced. The scale of possession kept growing because each loss of life fed Vitiate more power, and more power let him dominate more minds. The cycle kept building until the planet had nothing left to give. When the cycle reached its peak, the final extraction hit. Ziost was consumed the same way Nathema had been, its surface reduced to gray ash, all life erased, the Force stripped from the world. The Republic could only watch from orbit as the planet died beneath them. Nathema had required a massive ritual with more than 8,000 gathered Sith Lords. Ziost required only Vitiate and the anguish he created from a distance. When weakened, he did not seek a stronger body or a better weapon. Inside a citadel, Vitiate overpowered the most dangerous people alive. In the Legends novel Revan, the confrontation takes place inside the Emperor's own stronghold on Dromund Kaas. Revan, Mitra Surik, the astromech droid T3M4, and Lord Scourge entered together. Revan had survived the Mandalorian Wars and the Jedi Civil War, had fallen to the dark side, and had clawed his way back. Surik had walked away from the Force entirely after the catastrophic final battle of the Mandalorian Wars at Malachor V, and then reclaimed it through sheer will. Between them, they carried more combat experience than most Jedi would accumulate across several lifetimes. They had planned for the confrontation, coordinated their approach, and entered the Citadel together with every advantage they could arrange. Inside that Citadel, Vitiate broke them all. The Emperor was already devastatingly powerful, but the moment that secured his victory was Scourge's betrayal. In the middle of the fight, Scourge received a Force vision of an unknown Jedi Knight who would one day bring about the Emperor's true downfall. He realized that neither Revan nor Mitra was that person. Acting on that vision, Scourge struck down Mitra and allowed Revan's capture, gambling centuries of servitude against a future he could barely see. He chose to serve the being he loathed most in the galaxy because the Force had shown him that the right moment had not yet arrived. Scourge accepted the Emperor's reward of immortality, knowing that his only path forward was patience measured in centuries. As the Emperor's wrath, he carried out Vitiate's will across the galaxy for 300 years, eliminating threats to the throne and enforcing the Emperor's commands without hesitation. No one in the Empire suspected that every act of loyalty was a performance. Scourge held the deception in place across lifetimes, watching entire generations rise and fall while he waited for a vision he can never be certain would come true. Vitiate kept Revan alive for 300 years, feeding on his mind the entire time. He sustained a mental link that slowly drained Revan's strength, drawing on his connection to the Force as a continuous source of energy. The link was not passive. Vitiate actively pulled at Revan's memories and his connection to the living Force, draining pieces of him year after year while keeping his body alive through the dark side. Revan remained trapped and aware through all of it. His body kept functioning while his spirit was consumed piece by piece. He could feel the drain and could feel himself becoming less with each passing year. The only presence that reached him was the Force ghost of Mitra Surik, who stayed with him across those centuries and helped him hold on to who he had been. One of the most powerful Jedi the Order had ever trained was reduced to a living battery in a cell that no one in the Republic even knew existed. In the Legends MMO, The Old Republic, Vitiate's ultimate goal was to perform the Nathema ritual on the entire galaxy, consuming all life at once. A Jedi Knight, later known as the Hero of Tython, stopped him before that ritual could be completed, confronting the Emperor directly on Dromund Kaas in a fight that pushed both of them to their limits. The Emperor's voice channeled Vitiate's full strength, and the Jedi Knight who faced him had to draw on everything the Order had taught and everything Scourge had revealed about the Emperor's weaknesses. The confrontation nearly ended the Jedi Knight more than once, and the Emperor fought with a kind of certainty that comes from having dominated every opponent for over a millennium. The Jedi Knight was the one Scourge had seen in his Force vision centuries earlier. Scourge fought alongside the Hero of Tython when the moment finally came, completing the betrayal he had set in motion against Revan and Mitra 300 years before. The centuries of patience had finally produced the exact moment Scourge had been waiting for. Even then, the victory was not permanent. The Emperor's voice was destroyed, but Vitiate's consciousness survived and began searching for a new vessel. Defeating him in direct combat had cost the Jedi Order one of the most difficult battles in its history, and it had only removed one layer of Vitiate's power. None of those feats came from raw strength alone. Nathema required the gathered power of thousands of Sith and may have drawn on Xildrog, an ancient machine tied to the planet that could channel massive concentrations of Force energy. Even Vitiate's most devastating act may have rested on a foundation someone else built. Ziost required a sustained process of domination and chaos before the final consumption could take place. The galactic extinction plan needed years of groundwork. Even the confrontation with Revan and Surik happened inside Vitiate's own citadel on his terms. Every display of Vitiate's power depended on systems, preparation, or positioning that he had arranged long before the moment arrived. The Empire itself was built to feed him. For over 8,000 years, Vitiate ruled from concealment. He governed through the Dark Council for political decisions and through voices that carried his consciousness in host bodies. He also operated through the children of the Emperor, agents placed in positions of trust within the Republic and even the Jedi Order. He rarely appeared and even more rarely spoke. For centuries at a time, the Empire functioned as though its Emperor might not even exist, and that was by design. The Sith who served him spent their lives fighting each other for rank, and every power struggle and betrayal between them generated the kind of anguish Vitiate fed on. The wars against the Republic did the same on a far larger scale. The cycles of conquest and collapse kept entire sectors in a state of permanent unrest, and the suffering produced by those cycles flowed back towards the one being who could draw strength from it. The wars Vitiate started fed him from both sides at once. The Great Galactic War produced suffering on a galactic scale, and every loss of life on either side fed the conditions Vitiate needed to grow stronger. Entire worlds changed hands. The ripple effects reached families who had never seen a blaster fired in their streets, and generations of children grew up with the assumption that the next offensive was always coming. Governments rationed resources and redirected entire economies towards the war effort. A win on one front brought grief and dread across the Republic. A loss on another brought rage and desperation from within his own ranks. Vitiate had no reason to win decisively. A final victory would have ended the war, and ending the war would have shut off the anguish he fed on. The Cold War that followed the Treaty of Coruscant kept that same supply running without open conflict. On contested worlds along the border, settlements lived under the constant possibility of raids from either side. Republic garrisons drilled against offensives that never came. While Imperial outposts held ground, they had no strategic reason to keep. The galaxy stayed too tense to recover and too exhausted to resist. Vitiate withdrew during this period to pursue goals the Dark Council never fully understood, leaving his empire to feed on its own anxiety while he shaped his next identity in secret. The being who had built all of that had started with nothing but his own strength on a world no one in the wider galaxy had ever heard of. Before he was Vitiate, the boy known as Tenebrae conquered his first world before he turned 13. Born on the farming world of Medrius, the child was the illegitimate son of the Sith Lord Drameth and a farmer's wife. By the age of 6, he had killed his stepfather. By 10, he had conquered the surrounding lands through raw terror and dark side strength, tormenting his own mother in the process. When he learned the identity of his true father, he confronted Lord Drameth directly, stripped the older Sith of his connection to the Force, and imprisoned his spirit for 2,000 years. Drameth had been a full Sith Lord, with decades of training and political power behind him. The child who faced him took all of it away in a single encounter. Mark Aragnos, the most powerful Sith Lord of that era, traveled to Medrius and recognized what Tenebrae was. He granted the boy the title of Lord and dominion over the entire world. Ragnos offered no training and no guidance. He left Medrius without attempting to shape what he had found. For the next century, Tenebrae ruled Medrius alone, studying the deeper rituals of the dark side, growing his power far beyond what any single Sith Lord was thought capable of holding. He spent those 100 years mastering techniques that had been forbidden even among the Sith, including methods of severing others from the Force and binding spirits long after death. By the time the Great Hyperspace War ended and the surviving Sith Lords scattered into exile, Tenebrae had already spent a lifetime preparing. He was no longer a child prodigy. He was the most dangerous being in his world, and he had made sure of it. For all the devastation Tenebrae could unleash, he could only reach what stood in front of him. As Vitiate, he ruled for 1,000 years without anyone seeing his true face. He did not hold court or lead armies. He governed through the Dark Council and through voices, host bodies that carried his consciousness and acted with his full authority. If a voice was destroyed, only the vessel fell. The consciousness behind it survived and moved into the next host without interruption. A voice could appear anywhere in the galaxy, speak as the Emperor, and wield the Emperor's Force abilities. No one outside the inner circle would ever know they were speaking to a vessel. The servants of the Emperor maintained this network, managing the transition from one voice to the next and keeping the Emperor's will moving even during the gaps between hosts. The children of the Emperor were even harder to detect. These were people who carried fragments of the Emperor's will inside them without ever knowing it. They lived entire lives in Republic service, trusted and respected by everyone around them before being activated at the moment Vitiate chose. Some held positions within the Jedi Order itself, and others served in Republic intelligence and military command. In the Old Republic, the dangers of the network's full extent become clear only when individual children began surfacing in places no one had thought to look. Destroying a voice only removed the body. Exposing a single child still left hundreds more embedded across the Republic, the military, and the Jedi's own ranks. No one could end Vitiate through direct confrontation, because no one knew where he actually was. Vitiate drained Revan for 300 years through a link that ran both ways. The mental connection Vitiate used to feed on Revan also gave Revan a channel to push back. He fed small hesitations into the Emperor's thinking at critical moments, enough to delay decisions without Vitiate realizing the resistance was there. The Empire's planned offensive against the Republic was postponed by nearly 300 years because of that subtle influence, and Vitiate did not discover the source until after Revan was freed. Even so, 3 centuries of direct contact with Vitiate's mind came at a cost that proved just how deeply the Emperor's power could break a person. The captivity fractured Revan so completely that, as revealed in the Legends expansion Shadow of Revan, his light and dark halves split apart entirely, each half continuing to fight long after the man they had belonged to was gone. Vitiate had held one of the strongest Jedi who ever lived inside his mind for 300 years, and what came out the other side was no longer whole. Valkorion was the most ambitious identity Vitiate ever built, and the longest in the making. He did not simply rename himself and move to a new planet. He found an old Zakuulan civilization and reshaped it over centuries until its history, wealth, military, and mythology revolved around him. He wove himself into the planet's oldest stories, replacing ancient gods and cultural heroes with versions of himself until Zakuul's entire recorded history pointed towards him as his endpoint. He positioned himself as the fulfillment of prophecies his own agents had planted generations earlier, layering the deception so deeply that the people of Zakuul could not separate their own origins from his influence. Zakuul became impossible to imagine without him. The Eternal Fleet, Zakuul's devastating military force, launched a campaign that rapidly crushed both the Republic and the old Sith Empire, striking his deepest korriban, the ancient Sith home world. The fleet moved with a coordination that neither superpower could match, hitting multiple targets in a rolling offensive that left no time for either side to regroup. Republic command centers that had withstood decades of Imperial assault fell within days. Sith strongholds that had never been breached were overwhelmed before reinforcements could arrive. Military leaders on both sides had spent their entire careers planning for threats from each other, and none of them had prepared for a third power that outmatched them both. Neither superpower had known Zakuul existed. By the time it emerged, years of conflict between the Republic and the Sith Empire had already drained both powers to the point where a third force, arriving fresh and fully armed, could overwhelm them before either side could mount a real defense. Zakuul ran on devotion, and that made it unlike anything Vitiate had built before. Many citizens viewed Valkorion as a timeless guide and protector, and their society gave them stability that few civilizations in the galaxy could match. The Knights of Zakuul served because they believed in Valkorion personally, and he had spent generations building that belief. Their Force tradition was devoted entirely to him, and service to Valkorion was treated as its highest purpose. The Sith Empire had always run on dread and constant competition for rank, which generated useful conflict but kept the Empire permanently unstable. On Zakuul, citizens did not serve out of obligation. They served because the society Valkorion had designed gave them wealth and stability that no alternative could match. To oppose Valkorion meant rejecting the foundation on which their entire world had been built. The Sith Empire had proved across 1,000 years that subjects held in place by force will eventually turn. On Zakuul, the people defended Valkorion because they believed in him. In the Legends expansion Knights of the Fallen Empire, their loyalty required no enforcement. After Valkorion was struck down by his own son Arkan during the invasion of the Core Worlds, his physical form ended, but the being behind it did not. His consciousness took up residence inside the mind of the Alliance commander known as the Outlander. Vitiate had always embedded himself in the closest available structure and reshaped it from the inside, and the Outlander's mind was simply the next structure in line. Inside the Outlander's mind, Valkorion controlled the terms of their shared existence. He froze time when he chose and reshaped the environment they stood in. At critical moments, he offered surges of raw force power, then pulled them away the instant the Outlander began to rely on them. He decided when to help and when to withdraw, making it clear that the Outlander's survival depended heavily on his willingness to allow it. He would let the Outlander struggle to the edge of failure before stepping in, ensuring that every rescue reinforced who held the real authority inside that shared mind. The Outlander learned quickly that resistance meant silence. Valkorion would pull back completely, leaving the Outlander to face threats alone until cooperation resumed. The cycle trained dependence without ever naming it. Even inside another person's consciousness, stripped of every empire and every ritual, Vitiate could freeze time and reshape reality at will. His own family was not exempt from that control. Valkorion had watched his son Arkan kill his other son Thexan during a military campaign and did nothing to intervene. Vitiate's daughter Valen was so powerful in the Force that he grew wary of what she might one day become. He imprisoned his own daughter and brought her to the surface of Nathema, where the void left by his original ritual limited her abilities and made her more open to conditioning. In the Legends expansion Knights of the Eternal Throne, Valen was trained to respond to a control phrase. Her will bent by the emptiness of a world Vitiate had hollowed out 1,000 years earlier. Valen left Nathema carrying a trigger phrase that could silence her at a word. The void on Nathema suppressed her connection to the Force long enough for the conditioning to take hold. The process was designed to bind her will to a single phrase that could shut down her Force abilities and her resistance in the same instant. She would spend the rest of her life carrying that weakness without knowing its full origin, responding to a command she had no memory of learning. Her raw connection to the Force was growing faster than Vitiate could manage through authority alone. And the same act of consumption that had granted him immortality a millennium earlier was turned into a tool to limit her. Each identity Vitiate built solved one limitation and created the next, leaving no single person with a complete understanding of what he had become. Only when survivors from those separate parts of his life finally stood together could the full picture emerge. The people who finally ended Vitiate had each survived a different layer of his power. Kara Carson had been a child of the Emperor and broken free, carrying the memory of his mental grip as she had felt it from the inside. She knew the exact sensation of losing her own mind to his control and the precise moment when his hold could be broken. Lord Scourge had served as the Emperor's wrath for centuries, close enough to learn how Vitiate thought and where his confidence thinned. His service had been a long deception, endured in silence while he waited for the moment his Force vision had shown him. Satele Shan had spent decades fighting Vitiate's influence across multiple wars, carrying losses that stretched back generations. Revan's long captivity had given him knowledge no willing student could ever gain. The Outlander had survived inside Valkorion's own consciousness, seeing through every identity because the Outlander knew exactly who was wearing them. None of them had volunteered for the knowledge they now held. Each fragment of the understanding had been paid for in years of captivity, loss, or service under false loyalty. The violation of her own mind gave Kira her knowledge. 3 centuries of performing loyalty he did not feel gave Scourge his, and being consumed alive for 300 years gave Revan his. Satele had watched the same darkness outlast every campaign and every alliance she built across decades of war. The Outlander had shared a consciousness with the being behind every mask, and watched him try to wear one more. When the end came, in the Legends MMO update Echoes of Oblivion, Vitiate's identities were stripped away in sequence. Valkorion fell first, the God King's authority dismantled by the people his empire had once controlled. The devotion that had sustained Zakuul for centuries was turned against him as the people he had shaped recognized that their protector and their predator had always been the same being. Then Vitiate, the hidden emperor, was pulled out from behind the layers of concealment he had spent a millennium building. The voices were gone, and the children had been exposed. The Dark Council he once used as a shield no longer existed. Finally, Tenebrae, the predator who had consumed a world before he was old enough to rule one, was exposed. Stripped of every mask he had ever worn, the being at the center was laid bare for the first time in thousands of years. He had no voice waiting to receive him, and no network of children to activate. Every structure he had ever relied on was gone. Vitiate built engines of power that ran without him, and that is what separated him from every other Force user the galaxy had ever produced. The galaxy had seen beings with greater raw force strength, beings who could have overpowered him in a direct contest. Vitiate alone had learned to make his power sustain and multiply itself across 1,000 years, building systems that fed the force back into him without requiring his presence. The people who ended him had each survived a different part of his reach, and none of them could have done it alone. They stood in the same room, and for the first time since Medrius, that was enough. Every one of those survivors had seen a different piece of him, and not one of them had seen where it started. Long before the empires and the masks, he was a child on a quiet farming world. He had black eyes and a voice that carried far more weight than a child should. He was 6 years old the first time he killed someone. Valkorion refused to die for 1,500 years. Empires rose and collapsed around him. Entire worlds vanished during his reign, and still, he remained. But he did not begin that way. He began as a child in a forgotten world, with black eyes and a voice that no one could explain. Across the Legends novels and the storylines of the Old Republic, what emerges is not just the rise of a Sith, but something far older and far harder to kill, because in the end, the thing that destroyed him was not an army, not a weapon, and not another Sith. It came from inside. Chapter 1. The Boy with Black Eyes. On the planet Medrias, in the outer reaches of the old Sith Empire, a child was born with eyes as black as the void of empty space. He never cried, not even as an infant. No animal would come near him, and when he began to talk, his voice carried a weight and power that no child's voice should have held. His parents were simple farmers. The force was not strong in either of them, but the boy's mother had carried on an affair with the Sith Lord who ruled over their world, a man named Lord Dramath. The child she bore from that affair was something neither parent could explain and neither could control. At the age of 6, the boy began to manifest the Force. Not gently, not gradually, he erupted. His father, suspecting the truth about the boy's parentage, flew into a rage and attacked the mother, and the child stopped him, reaching out to the dark side and snapping his father's neck with a thought. He was 6 years old. His mother did not die quickly. The boy tortured her using the Force, inflicting pain as punishment for betraying the family. By the time she was gone, he had already begun practicing on others. He made the people of his village bow to him. Those who refused were tortured and killed through the Force, publicly, slowly, and deliberately. He wanted the others to watch. He did not hide what he was doing. He made spectacles of it, drawing out the suffering of his victims so that everyone in the surrounding area would know what happened to those who defied him. Over the next 4 years, his reputation spread to nearby villages. Followers gathered around him, some out of fanaticism, others out of terror. Entire communities submitted without resistance once they learned what had happened to the ones that fought. Many died simply to feed his appetite for suffering, tortured in public executions so he could savor their ends. His biological father, Lord Dramath, eventually heard rumors of the child conquering villages on the outskirts of his territory, but Dramath had long forgotten the commoner who bore him a son and considered the reports beneath his notice. He sent envoys to investigate. None of them returned. Only then did Dramath travel to confront the boy himself. He intended to judge whether the child was worthy of serving him, or whether he should simply be executed. He brought no army. He expected to find a gifted but manageable child, someone he could either use or dispose of in an afternoon. The child had no intention of serving, and no intention of dying. When they met face to face, the 10-year-old stripped his father of his connection to the Force entirely, then imprisoned him inside a powerful holocron, sealing Dramath's consciousness in a cage where he would wither into madness over an eternity. It was not a clean death. It was something worse. Dramath's firstborn son, the boy's half-brother, fled rather than face him. Other powerful Sith tried to seize the empty throne. All of them fell. By the time he was a teenager, the entire planet belonged to him. At 13, the boy traveled to the planet Ziost, the seat of Sith power, and presented himself to Mark Ragnos, the Lord of all Sith and ruler of the Sith Council. Ragnos was the most powerful Sith alive, a being who had held dominion over the Sith species for longer than most of his subjects could remember. He was not easily impressed, but the teenager standing before him radiated a depth of dark side power that Ragnos had never sensed in someone so young. The ambition behind those black eyes was absolute, not the reckless ambition of a child seeking approval, but the cold, measured ambition of a predator waiting for its moment. Ragnos granted the child a title and a name, Lord Vitiate. His home world, Medrias, was his to rule officially. Lord Vitiate returned home, renamed the planet Nathema, and disappeared from galactic history for the next 100 years. He did not fight in the Great Hyperspace War. He took no side when Nagasato and Ludo Kresh tore each other apart for control of the Sith. He did not join any faction, attend any council, or seek any alliance. He simply watched, studied, and waited, alone on a world that no one else considered worth visiting. While the Sith destroyed themselves from within and the Jedi hunted the survivors to the edge of extinction, Lord Vitiate sat alone on Nathema and prepared for what would come next. 100 years of solitude, 100 years of research into the deepest, most forbidden depths of dark side power. No one knows exactly what he studied during that century, but when he finally emerged, he had the knowledge to do something no Sith Lord had ever attempted. Chapter 2: The Ritual. The Great Hyperspace War ended in catastrophe for the Sith. The Republic and the Jedi drove them from the galaxy's core, and the surviving Sith Lords scattered into the unknown, desperate and afraid. Most believed their species was on the verge of extinction. Lord Vitiate saw opportunity. He broke his silence and called a general council of the surviving Sith. He invited thousands of the most powerful Sith Lords to his palace on Nathema, built on the site where he had imprisoned his father and tortured his mother as a child. He promised them something extraordinary, a ritual that would unlock the full potential of the dark side, power beyond anything they had ever witnessed or imagined. Some refused the invitation, but thousands answered, because none of them believed one scholar on a backwater world could threaten that many Sith Lords at once. Lord Vitiate was not known as a warrior. He had no great victories or conquests beyond his home world. His reputation was that of a scholar, not a conqueror, and the Sith Lords were afraid. The Jedi were hunting them. They were desperate for any weapon they could use against the servants of the light. Vitiate played on that fear, convincing those who answered his call to set aside their suspicions and join in a single cause. Once they arrived on Nathema, they quickly fell under his control. He dominated their minds, crushed their resistance, and turned them into slaves to his will. Then, he forced them to participate in the most complex ritual of Sith sorcery ever attempted. He devoured them. He fed on their power, absorbing it into himself, obliterating all traces of his victims. But the ritual did not stop with the Sith Lords. They were only the eye of the storm, the center of a vortex that spread across the entire planet. Every man, woman, and child on Nathema died that day. Every beast, bird, and fish, all the insects and plants, every living being touched by the Force was consumed. When the ritual ended, Nathema was no longer a world. It was a husk sucked dry. Lord Vitiate had sacrificed millions, stealing their life force to make himself immortal. Their deaths made him stronger than perhaps any Sith who had come before. He ceased to be a Lord Vitiate. On that day, the Emperor was truly born. Centuries later, a Sith Lord named Scourge visited Nathema and experienced what the ritual had left behind. He felt the absence of the Force before the shuttle even touched down, a sensation so alien that it took him several moments to understand what was wrong. The Force was omnipresent. It existed everywhere in the galaxy in some form at all times. On Nathema, it was simply gone, not weakened, not corrupted, absent. On the surface, Scourge walked through deserted streets lined with intact buildings. The structures had not been damaged. The ritual had not been an explosion or a weapon in any conventional sense. It had been an extraction. The buildings stood exactly as they had on the day everyone inside them ceased to exist. Mangle speeders and shutters lay where they had crashed when their pilots were taken mid-flight. Piles of clothes, jackets, boots, trousers sat in the streets and in doorways, the only remains of people who had vanished in an instant. No scavengers had come to pick through the remains. Even the vermin and insects were extinct. The sun overhead, once bright orange, now appeared a pale shade of brown. Colors were leached from every surface. There was no wind. The air tasted stale. Scourge began to shiver despite the neutral temperature. His companion Darth Nyrus told him what he was feeling. The chill of the void. The absence of the energy that gave heat to every emotion and every thought. The Force had been stripped away, and his body knew it before his mind could process it. His voice, when he spoke, sounded hollow and distant to his own ears. By the time they returned to the shuttle, Scourge's stomach was churning. He had lived his entire life attuned to the Force. Having it stripped away left him physically ill. Scourge was a committed Sith. He understood massacres. He had no trouble with the idea of the strong taking from the weak. But Nathema was different. Death and destruction unleashed powerful emotions, fear, suffering, hatred, and those emotions fueled the dark side. That was how the Sith operated. But what had happened on Nathema was not destruction, it was annihilation. The Emperor had consumed everything: life, sound, color, even the Force itself, and left behind a vacuum of existence, a blight on the natural order. Scourge had entered Nathema, expecting to see evidence of power. He left understanding that the Emperor was something the Sith had never encountered before, a predator that fed on the Force itself. The planet was not destroyed, it was emptied. The void it left behind was unlike anything the galaxy had a word for. The Emperor gathered what remained of the Sith species and led them into the unknown reaches of the galaxy, far beyond the borders of Republic-charted space. The Republic and the Jedi believed the Sith were extinct. Somewhere in the unknown regions, a storm-covered world was already being reshaped into the foundation of something far worse. Chapter 3: The Hidden Empire. Darth Nihilus was one of the most senior members of the Dark Council, and she believed the Emperor was insane. She had visited Nathema and seen the void firsthand. She understood what the Emperor had done to an entire world, and she believed he intended to do it again. Her conspiracy recruited agents, gathered intelligence, and even captured a Jedi prisoner to study for weaknesses they could exploit. She convinced a faction of like-minded Sith Lords that the Emperor's plan to provoke a war with the Republic would expose the Sith to the Jedi and lead to their extinction. The Emperor destroyed them all in a single night. The conspiracy was exposed, its members eliminated, and the Dark Council rebuilt with new faces, loyal ones, or at least ones who had learned the cost of disloyalty. The system absorbed the betrayal exactly as it was designed to. The Emperor did not even appear to deal with it personally. He let his institutions handle it and continued his preparations without interruption. That system, and the civilization it governed, had been built over 1,000 years of exile. The Sith had resettled on Droman Kaz, a storm-covered world deep in the unexplored regions where dark clouds perpetually blocked out the sun and lightning arced across the sky at all hours. Under the guidance of the Emperor, the Sith abandoned the chaotic, self-destructive culture of their ancestors. In its place, they built a military society in which the Imperial machine operated and controlled virtually every aspect of daily life. Farmers, mechanics, teachers, cooks, janitors, all part of the great martial apparatus, each individual trained to perform their duties with maximum discipline and efficiency. A citadel rose above the capital, Kaz City. Built by slaves and devoted followers, it served as both palace and fortress, an unassailable meeting place for the Emperor and the 12 handpicked Sith Lords who made up his Dark Council. The dark side power radiating from within the building could be felt across the entire city. The Empire expanded steadily and quietly. World after world in the unexplored regions fell to the Sith, conquered and enslaved, without the Republic ever learning of their existence. Over the course of 1,000 years, the Sith built an empire whose power and influence rivaled the glory of their ancient past, and the galaxy that had tried to exterminate them had no idea they were still alive. For a millennium, the Emperor waited. He did not age, he did not awaken, he simply endured, watching the Republic from the shadows, preparing for the moment he would reveal himself. The system he built to maintain control was unlike anything the Sith had used before. The Emperor did not appear in person or sit on a visible throne. Instead, he ruled through layers of intermediary institutions. The Dark Council managed the day-to-day operations of governance, military deployment, and expansion. They competed with each other constantly, plotting and scheming in the way all Sith did. The Emperor allowed this, treating the infighting as a managed variable. Enough competition to keep his subordinates sharp, but never enough to let any single figure accumulate enough power to threaten him. When the Emperor needed to communicate directly, he used the voice, a host body into which he placed his consciousness. To speak with the voice was to have an audience with the Emperor himself, whose mind inhabited the body and spoke through it. The host's own identity was suppressed entirely. If a voice was killed or damaged, the Emperor simply transferred to another. He had used many forms over the centuries. Assassins had tried to kill the Emperor before. They failed, not because of guards or defenses, but because there was no single body to kill. His consciousness was not confined to one form. Plotting against the Dark Council accomplished nothing because the Emperor controlled them all from behind the scenes. The institutions of the Emperor, the military, the academy, the council, the voice, were not separate from the Emperor but extensions of him, distributed across an entire civilization so that no single point of failure could bring the system down. The officer corps turned over constantly, generations of soldiers trained, deployed, and replaced. The Dark Council itself turned over as members plotted, rose, fell, and were destroyed. all under the Emperor's careful observation. Conspiracies formed periodically, as some members grew uneasy with the Emperor's plans. But the Emperor had survived for centuries longer than any of them had been alive. He had seen every kind of betrayal, and he had built a system to absorb it. After 1,000 years of preparation, the Emperor decided the time had come. The Great Galactic War was about to begin, and the Republic had no idea what was coming. Chapter 4: The Great War. The war lasted decades. It was the largest conflict the galaxy had seen since the fall of the original Sith Empire, and it was fought on more fronts than any single commander could track. The Sith struck first and struck hard, pouring out of the unknown regions with a military force the Republic did not know existed. Entire sectors fell in the opening months. Worlds that had never seen Sith influence were suddenly under occupation. The Republic scrambled to respond, pulling fleets from the core worlds to defend systems that had never seen combat before. The Jedi mobilized alongside the Republic military, but the sheer scale of the Imperial assault overwhelmed conventional defenses. The Empire used every tool available: conventional military operations, a Mandalorian army manipulated into blockading the Hydian Way, intelligence operations, and targeted strikes against Republic leadership. The blockade of the Hydian Way was devastating, choking one of the galaxy's most important trade routes and cutting off entire regions from Republic supply lines. When the blockade was finally broken, the Republic struck back, and the Empire counterattacked. Neither side could achieve a decisive advantage. The war ground on year after year, consuming resources and lives at a pace that neither government could sustain indefinitely. The Emperor had spent 1,000 years preparing for this war. The Republic had spent 1,000 years forgetting the Sith existed. And yet, the Republic held. Its institutions bent under the pressure but did not break. The Jedi fought on every front. New military leaders emerged to replace the ones who fell. The war the Emperor had expected to end quickly became a prolonged attrition that even his military machine could not resolve through force alone. Then, in a single stroke, the Emperor changed the shape of the war. While Sith diplomats sat at a negotiating table on Alderaan, discussing the terms of a possible peace, a strike force descended on Coruscant under the overall command of Darth Ongral, with Darth Malgus leading the ground assault. The target was not a military installation, not a government building, not a strategic asset in any conventional sense. The target was the Jedi Temple itself, the spiritual heart of the Republic, the place where the Jedi had trained, studied, and protected the galaxy for thousands of years. Destroying it would not win a battle, it would break the Republic's will. Malgus walked toward the temple's entrance with Alina Daru, his Twi'lek companion and warrior, at his side. 3 guards moved to intercept them. He drew on the Force, augmented his speed, and killed all 3 before they could fire a single shot. One crosscut through the chest, a second cleaved on the follow-through, the third hurled into the wall with enough force to crush bone. A Mandalorian ally rode her rocket pack to a high window and disappeared inside. Inside the temple, a vast hall extended for several hundred meters. 2 rows of elegant columns rose from floor to ceiling. Jedi Padawans gathered on the balconies above, watching. Half a dozen Jedi Knights dropped from the upper levels and took positions in the hall. Behind them, descending the grand staircase, came a Jedi Master, Ven Zallo. Malgus and Zallo stopped 2 meters apart. Neither spoke. The silence held until the chrono on Malgus's wrist began to beep. The slight sound rang out like an explosion in the vast hall. Then came the roar. A hijacked dropship carrying 50 Sith warriors crashed directly into the front of the temple at full speed. Stone shattered, columns collapsed, balconies crumbled, and bodies were crushed beneath the wreckage. The ship skidded along the temple floor, trailing fire, gouging stone, toppling everything in its path. When the reinforced passenger compartment blew open, 50 red lightsabers ignited simultaneously, and the sound heralded the fall of the temple, the fall of Coruscant, the fall of the Republic. The Jedi Temple, the symbol of the Republic's spiritual authority for thousands of years, fell. Malgus dueled Ven Zallo in the ruins. Neither had spoken a word to the other. Both knew what the moment required, and Malgus killed him. Imperial bombers followed. Coruscant burned. A skyrise became a pillar of flame. Republic fighters that got airborne were swarmed and destroyed. The capital of the Galactic Republic, the seat of its government, the home of the Jedi, was on fire. And on Alderaan, the Republic delegation had no idea. They were still negotiating. The Treaty of Coruscant was signed under duress. The Republic agreed to terms because its capital was in ruins and its military was shattered. But the Emperor did not press for total destruction. He stopped. The war he had spent a millennium preparing, the war his Sith had just won on the battlefield, he deliberately chose not to finish. Malgus stood among the ruins of the temple and watched the sky, waiting for the final bombardment. It never came. When he contacted his cruiser, his commander told him the peace negotiations were continuing. All forces had been ordered to stand down. Malgus was stunned. He had conquered the Republic's capital, and his Emperor had chosen to negotiate. The war was over, the Republic survived, and almost no one understood why the Emperor had let them live. The treaty split the galaxy into spheres of influence. Worlds changed hands, borders were redrawn. A Cold War settled in, tense, fragile, and punctuated by proxy conflicts, espionage, and border skirmishes that never quite escalated into open war. The Sith Empire consolidated its gains. The Republic licked its wounds and tried to rebuild. And the Emperor, having achieved something with the treaty that none of his commanders could articulate, withdrew further into silence. Chapter 5: The Hunger. The Emperor's withdrawal after the treaty was not about precedent. He had been manipulating events from behind the scenes for centuries. By this time, something was different. His silence was deeper, his presence more distant, his communications with the Dark Council rarer than they had ever been. Some on the Council began to suspect that the Emperor was losing interest in the Empire entirely, that his attention had turned elsewhere, towards something beyond the borders of known space. There was a reason for the silence, though it would not be understood for centuries. During the Mandalorian Wars, years before the Great Galactic War began, two Jedi named Revan and Malak had pursued the remnants of the Mandalorian fleet beyond the Outer Rim and encountered the Sith Emperor Andromen Kaz. The Emperor dominated their minds, turned them to the dark side, and sent them back to the Republic as weapons. They became Sith Lords who would wage war against the very civilization they had once sworn to protect. When Revan was eventually freed from the Emperor's control and redeemed by the Jedi Council, fragments of his memory remained missing. He could not remember what he had found beyond the Outer Rim, but he knew something terrible was waiting there. The nightmares never stopped, a world of perpetual darkness, thunder, and lightning. Nathema. Revan eventually returned to Dromund Kaz with allies to confront the Emperor directly. The confrontation was brief and devastating. The Emperor overwhelmed Revan with a barrage of darkside lightning so intense that Revan's skin began to boil and blister, the flesh of his face melting against the superheated metal of his mask. An astromech droid that rushed to help was obliterated in a single burst of force energy, every internal circuit and external component destroyed in an instant. The Emperor had stood perfectly still through most of the fight, his emotionless veneer cracking only once. A primal hiss of hate when Revan managed to deflect a bolt of lightning back into his chest. Revan was defeated. The Emperor imprisoned him in a secret facility and kept him alive for 300 years, suspended between life and death while the Emperor fed on his strength. But the feeding created a two-way link, and through that link, Revan was able to subtly keep the Emperor in check, delaying his plans even from captivity. The Emperor's wrath, a personal enforcer granted eternal life to serve at the Emperor's side, watched over both his master and the imprisoned Jedi, waiting for the day someone would finally be strong enough to finish what Revan started. When the Cold War eventually broke into open conflict again, the Emperor's involvement was sporadic and strange. A powerful Jedi Knight, later known as the Hero of Tython, confronted the Emperor and destroyed his host's body in battle on Dromund Kaz. The Emperor's spirit survived, but was grievously wounded, forced into slumber on the moon Yavin 4. When a now-mad Revan later attempted to resurrect the Emperor to a physical form in order to destroy him permanently, the plan failed, and the Emperor fed on the deaths caused by the battle, restoring his strength instead. Then, the Emperor's true nature began to reveal itself. On the planet Ziost, once a sacred Sith world and a major seat of Imperial power, the Emperor struck without warning. His influence spread across the planet through the Force, seizing the minds of Imperial soldiers, government officials, and civilians alike. He turned them against each other, engineering a massive slaughter across the planet's cities. He was not simply controlling individuals one at a time. His reach extended further with every passing hour. Imperial soldiers turned their weapons on civilians they had sworn to protect. Government officials walked into public spaces and began killing at random. The possessed moved with purpose, not mindless violence, but coordinated slaughter designed to maximize casualties. From the menacing People's Tower in the center of New Adasta to massive armored walkers patrolling for fresh targets, the Emperor's presence was overwhelming, his power growing with every death. A joint task force of Imperial and Republic agents attempted to stop him. Lana Beniko, the Minister of Sith Intelligence, coordinated with Republic agent Theron Shan to free the population. They deployed an electrostatic weapon on New Adasta that could temporarily sever the Emperor's hold on individuals, but the relief never lasted. The Emperor reasserted control, and the crisis deepened. The Republic sent military forces under the pretense of a humanitarian rescue mission. Those forces fell under the Emperor's control the moment they landed, adding to his army of possessed. Even the Sixth Line, an elite team of Jedi commandos, fell under the Emperor's domination after arriving on the surface. Every death on Zayas fed the Emperor's power. That was the point. The slaughter was not collateral damage, it was the mechanism. A fraction of the population was evacuated, but most remained trapped on the surface, either possessed or hunted by those who were. And then, without warning, the Emperor stopped playing with individual puppets. He unleashed a wave of dark side energy that expanded across the entire planet. Every living thing on Zayas was consumed. The surface became a barren, frozen wasteland. Trees were left standing as solid ash. Stone statues crumbled. The crisis left behind monoliths, monstrous creatures of dark side energy rather than living organisms. Zayas looked exactly like Nathema had looked 1,000 years earlier. The same ritual, the same result. The same void where the Force had been. The Nathema ritual had not been an act of desperation. It had not been a one-time event driven by circumstances. Zayas suggested that the Emperor could, and perhaps always intended to, do it again. He had done it before on Nathema. Now, he had done it again on Zayas. 1,000 years apart, the same ritual, the same result. And the scope of his ambition may have gone further than anyone had imagined. Some believe the Emperor's ultimate goal was not to rule the galaxy, but to consume it, every living thing, on every world, in a single galaxy-spanning ritual that would make him an all-powerful, unkillable entity. Whether that was truly his plan, whether it had always been his plan, remained uncertain even to those who had studied him most closely. But after Zayas, the possibility could no longer be dismissed. After consuming Zayas, the Emperor vanished. His former empire disowned him. They began calling him Vitiate, a name stripped of the title he had once held. The Sith Empire he had built over 1,000 years now treated him as a rogue threat rather than a ruler. But the Emperor was not gone. He had simply become someone else. Chapter 6: The Eternal Throne. Somewhere in wild space, far beyond the borders of both the Republic and the Sith Empire, a golden throne sat inside a towering palace. The man on it called himself Valkorion. The Emperor had discovered the planet Zakuul centuries earlier, during the Hidden Empire's expansion into the unknown regions. He had found something else there too, the Eternal Fleet, an ancient armada of automated warships with technology that surpassed anything in the known galaxy, and he had made a decision that would reshape everything. While still ruling the Sith Empire through the Dark Council and the Voice, he assumed yet another form and another name on Zakuul. The entity behind the name was the same one who had consumed Nathema and ruled the Sith Empire for a millennium. Valkorion was simply his greatest mask, and Zakuul his greatest, most ambitious creation. An ancient Sith entity with the power to possess and control the bodies of others, using them as puppets to enforce his will on the galaxy, he had assumed many forms over the centuries. The immortal Emperor of Zakuul was the newest, sustained by immense dark side power, living for centuries without aging. On Zakuul, Valkorion built something entirely different from the Sith Empire. There was no Dark Council, no assassination culture, no Sith doctrine. Instead, Valkorion presented himself as a visible, benevolent God Emperor, worshipped by his people, accessible to his subjects, and revered as the founder of their civilization. Where Joman Kaz was built on militarized discipline and fear, Zakuul was built on devotion and belief. The people of Zakuul worshipped Valkorion. The Sith on Droman Kaz had only ever feared him. Valkorion took Senya Tural, a knight of Zakuul, from his elite guard as his consort. They had 3 children, twin sons Arkan and Thexan, and a daughter named Valen. As children, the twins swapped clothes to confuse their servants. They sparred together in the shadow of the Eternal Fleet, and once ran away to live in the Endless Swamp for a month. Valkorion treated all 3 of his children as instruments, not as family. He showed them no warmth, no pride, and no interest beyond their usefulness. As the children grew, Senya watched her husband become colder and more distant. She loved her children. They did not return her affection, not because they were incapable of it, but because their father's indifference had taught them that love was weakness. Senya tried to reach them. She failed, and Valkorion made no effort to help. Vaylin was the most powerful of the three, and the most dangerous. Even as a small child, her connection to the Force was extraordinary. During a sparring match with the other young trainees, she lost control and accidentally used the Force to crush several Knights of Zakuul to death. She had not meant to kill them, she simply could not contain what was inside her. Her power terrified even Valkorion. He did not try to train her. He did not try to help her learn control. Instead, he had taken her to Nathema, the dead world he had created 1,000 years earlier, the planet stripped of the Force and imprisoned there. On a world where the Force did not exist, Vaylin's power could not manifest. She was caged in a void. While she was there, a conditioning trigger was implanted in her mind. The phrase, "kneel before the dragon of Zakuul," would render her unable to fight back, unable to resist, unable to do anything but submit. Vaylin spent years in captivity on Nathema, imprisoned by her own father, on a planet that existed only because he had consumed every living thing on it centuries before. She was a child locked inside the scar of her father's first atrocity. The twins grew into warriors. They proposed a plan to test the strength of the Republic and the Sith Empire. Valkorion approved the assault, but ordered only Thexan to lead the Eternal Fleet. Arcan disobeyed and joined his brother anyway. Together, they drove back both galactic powers, striking worlds across the galaxy. During an attack on Korriban, Arcan was caught in an explosion that took his left arm and scarred half his face. Thexan stood by him through the recovery. When the twins returned to Zakuul, they presented lightsabers of fallen Jedi and Sith as trophies, proof of everything they had accomplished. Valkorion looked at the trophies, said nothing, and turned away. Arcan snapped. The dark side ignited in his eyes. He leaped at his father with his lightsaber drawn. Thexan reached out with the Force and pulled his brother back mid-strike to save Valkorion's life. Arcan, still consumed by rage, turned on Thexan instead. Their duel lasted only seconds. Arcan struck his brother across the torso. Thexan looked at his brother with resignation as he fell. Arcan caught him and cradled him as he died. Valkorion watched. He waited until Thexan was dead. Then he walked to Arcan, looked down at his surviving son for the first time with something resembling acknowledgement, and spoke a single word, "Son." He told Arcan to come with him. Not long after, Darth Mar led a joint Republic Imperial task force into wild space, tracking leads on the former Sith Emperor. Mar was one of the most respected figures in the Sith Empire, a member of the Dark Council who had held his seat longer than almost anyone, a military strategist who had guided the Empire through the worst of the war. He knew, better than most, that the Emperor who had once ruled them was still alive somewhere, and that whatever he was planning would be worse than anything the galaxy had faced before. The Eternal Fleet intercepted Mar's expedition and destroyed it. Mar and a second figure, later known as the Outlander, were captured and brought before the Eternal Throne. The throne room was vast. Valkorion sat above them, golden and composed, radiating a presence that Mar recognized instantly. The face was different, the body was different, but the presence behind the eyes was unmistakable. This was the same being who had once ruled the Sith Empire and consumed Ziost. Mar said as much, openly, in front of Valkorion's own court. Valkorion offered Mar mercy if he would kneel. He released Mar from his restraints and gave him the chance to submit. Mar refused. He attacked and managed to kill a few guards before Valkorion struck him with a single blast of Force lightning. Darth Mar, who had survived decades of war and political conspiracy, died in seconds. The Emperor killed one of the most powerful Sith Lords alive as casually as swatting an insect. Then, Valkorion turned to the Outlander and repeated the offer. Shared power, shared purpose. A place at his side. He seemed genuinely interested in the Outlander, as though he had been waiting for someone worthy of the offer. While Valkorion was focused on this exchange, Arcan struck from behind. The blow was fatal. Valkorion's physical body collapsed on the steps of his own throne. But the Emperor did not die. His spirit refused to surrender to mortality. In the instant his body failed, he transferred his consciousness into the Outlander's mind. Arcan sensed his father's presence inside the Outlander and ordered the prisoner frozen in carbonite immediately. For 5 years, the Outlander remained suspended in an imperfect form of carbon freezing, alive but unable to act, trapped in darkness. During those 5 years, Arcan ruled the Eternal Empire as Emperor. He launched the Eternal Fleet against both the Republic and the Sith Empire, and both galactic powers, already weakened by decades of war against each other, were powerless to resist. The Republic submitted. The Sith Empire submitted. Tribute flowed to Zakuul from capitulated worlds across the galaxy. Arcan had achieved what his father never had: total military dominion over the known galaxy, but he did it with his father's fleet, his father's throne, and his father's technology, and he knew it. Inside the frozen Outlander's mind, Valkorion waited. He appeared to the Outlander in a vision and told them that he had finally shed his physical body and reached true immortality as a Force spirit. He spoke of Zakuul as the future, a civilization of Force users who followed neither the light nor the dark side, a new order that would replace the failures of both the Jedi and the Sith. He recognized that Arcan was misusing the power he had inherited, and he made it clear that the Outlander, not Arcan, was the vessel he had chosen. Chapter 7: The End of All Things. The Outlander was freed after 5 years by Lana Beneko, with the help of Koth Fortena and the astromech T-701. The escape from Zakuul was chaotic. During the flight, Senya Tiral, Valkorion's estranged consort and the mother of Arcan and Valen, joined the group and revealed her identity. Inside the Outlander's mind, Valkorion appeared at critical moments, advising, tempting, offering the full weight of his power at the exact instant the Outlander needed it most. Every offer came with a cost. Every time the Outlander accepted Valkorion's help, the Emperor took a little more control, sometimes seizing the Outlander's body entirely for brief, terrifying moments before releasing it. Every refusal was met with fury. On one occasion, when the Outlander rejected his aid, Valkorion subjected the Outlander to visions of suffering and destruction, a reminder of what he could do from inside a mind that had no walls against him. He was patient. He had been patient for 15 centuries. He could wait a little longer. The Outlander built an alliance from the wreckage of both the Republic and the Sith Empire, a resistance movement designed to challenge the Eternal Empire that Arcan now ruled. Refugees, defectors, smugglers, soldiers, and former enemies joined the cause on the hidden world of Odessen. But the real war was not fought on battlefields. It was fought inside the Outlander's head, between two wills that could not coexist. Arcan's rule was brutal and unfocused. He ordered planets bombarded to flush the Outlander out of hiding, destroying inhabited worlds to force someone to talk. He executed half his own Knights of Zakuul to root out disloyalty. He brooded on the Eternal Throne over a father who refused to face him in open combat, even from beyond death. Valen told him that Valkorion was plotting against them, that their father currently favored the Outlander and intended to take back the throne through a new host. Arcan agreed, but could do nothing about it. The enemy was inside someone else's mind, and no fleet could reach him there. Valen, freed from Nathema after Valkorion's physical death weakened her conditioning, served as High Justice under her brother. She was the enforcer, the one who killed the disloyal, hunted the fugitives, and kept the Eternal Empire's subjects afraid. When Arcan fell to the Alliance, Valen seized the throne for herself. She was unstable, violent, and immensely powerful, but her reign was shaped entirely by what her father had done to her. Her entire life had been defined by his control, and now that she was free of it, she had no idea what to do with her power except destroy. The Eternal Empress was a weapon that Valkorion had built and then failed to contain. The Alliance confronted Valen on Odessen. The Outlander was forced to choose between saving two captured allies. One would live and one would die at Valen's hand. The loss was real and permanent. Valen launched a full assault on the Alliance's base. The Outlander killed Valen in battle, and her death triggered a catastrophe no one had anticipated. Control of the Eternal Fleet was bound to the Eternal Throne, and with no one left to command it, the automated warships turned on the galaxy, bombarding planets without direction or restraint. The only way to stop the fleet was to claim the throne. The Outlander reached the Eternal Throne and sat down. The moment contact was made, Valkorion struck. He seized control of the Outlander's body and cast the Outlander into the depths of their own mind. The final battle was not fought with fleets or lightsabers. It was fought in a mindscape, a mental landscape shaped by memory, trauma, and force. Valkorion raised the spirits of his dead children to fight for him, commanding them as he had commanded everything else in his life, through force, not loyalty. The Outlander turned them. Valen, the daughter Valkorion had caged, conditioned, and discarded, faced the specter of her father one last time. He tried to use the conditioning trigger against her, the phrase that had controlled her since childhood. It failed. For the first time in her life, Valen's will held against his. Senya's spirit joined the fight. She poured out her grief and guilt to Valen, everything she had failed to say while her daughter was alive. For the first time, something cracked in Valen's rage. Together, the Outlander, Valen, Senya, and the allies who had fought across the Emperor's entire history, they struck Valkorion down inside the mindscape. He denounced his own family as motes of filth. It was the last thing he ever said as the Outlander reclaimed control. But the Emperor's destruction was not yet complete. His spirit, the remnant of the entity that had once been Tenebrae, persisted. Years later, in the final confrontation known as the Echoes of Oblivion, the Emperor's decaying essence threatened Jedi Master Satele Shan and her students, attempting to use their minds as a final anchor to the living world. Lord Scourge, the Emperor's Wrath, who had served at his side for 300 years and studied him every day of those centuries, joined Kira Carson and the Commander to enter Satele's mind and confront the Emperor's last remnant. Inside the mindscape, all three faces appeared. Tenebrae, the child with black eyes, Vitiate, the Emperor who consumed Nathema, Valkorion, the immortal Emperor of Zakuul. All aspects of the same entity, all fighting for survival. Valen stood against her father one last time, and held. The entity that had once been Tenebrae, who had become Vitiate, who had stolen the face and name of Valkorion, ceased to exist. His total lifespan spanned nearly 1,500 years. He had worn 3 names, ruled 3 empires, and consumed 2 worlds whole. He was among the longest reigning rulers in galactic history, one of the most powerful Force users the Sith had ever produced, and responsible for more death and destruction than almost any other single being on record. In the end, he was destroyed in the only place he had never fully conquered: someone else's mind. Not by a fleet, not by Jedi Council, not by any weapon the galaxy had ever built, but by a single will that refused to break, supported by the very people Valkorion had broken first: his consort, his daughter, and the allies his cruelty had forged into enemies. The Eternal Empire crumbled, the Sith Empire fractured, the Republic rebuilt. But in the corridors of power, in the archives of the Jedi, and in the nightmares of those who had faced him, the name carried a weight that no treaty or victory could erase. His story ended, but the era he shaped was only beginning to reckon with the damage. He fed on one Jedi for 300 years, and that Jedi still found a way to slow him down from inside the cell. Revan had already survived a war, a fall to the dark side, and a return to the light before he ever reached that throne room. To understand the man who spent 3 centuries as the Emperor's battery, watch the full story of Revan next.